I'm a computer programmer. Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes,
How do you know that to be the case?
because in October of 2000, I wrote a prototype for President Congressman Tom Feeney at the company I work for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
And when you say did just that, it would rig an election?
It would flip the vote 51-49 to whoever you wanted it to go to and whichever race you wanted to win.
How is there any election if they can just make up any number they want and you just have to trust us? Hey, thanks for tuning in to the Defending Utah channel. Whatever your favorite news source, there is never any shortage of hype about election fraud. Recently, I had the great pleasure of interviewing another true defender of Utah, a grassroots activist who sacrificed a lot of her time and resources to do the right thing for the people of this state. What she and her fellow volunteers at the Utah Voter Verification Project did on their own time is what a healthy government operation would already be doing in order to make sure elections function correctly. We can do very simple things, very logical, rational things. Things like, hey, if 5 people are on the voting record, then in real life, those 5 people probably should remember they voted, right? Very simple things, very basic things of auditing in the corporate world, what it would be a business process where you just kind of want to know that your process works. And so any smart executive would go throughout their company and they would check at each step in the assembly line or however their process works. And they would just check, hey, we put 5 widgets on the assembly line. There should have been 5 widgets by the time we got to QA. And then there should be 5 widgets coming out as the end result. Public officials should have been praising the work they accomplished and the data they reported to the public, but instead they've been threatened in an apparent attempt to minimize the implications of their data and telling them they might be racist or trying to scare them into changing the words they used in their official report, which would ultimately change the meaning of their data. Defending Utah has spoken out about election fraud in the past, but we have not said as much about any election reform efforts recently. We have recognized that the conspiracy against our freedom has a strategic advantage here, and when we're not careful, we can easily find ourselves in a black hole where all of our time and money is wasted. In the liberty community, we want to stand up for the rule of law under the Constitution, and if we study the Constitution as it's written and as originally intended, we'd start to see that the people don't actually elect the president nationally, nor did the founders ever intend for us to. That's a different subject for a different video. However, local elections is a very different story. This is a foundational piece of our republic. Activism efforts at the local level can at least shine a light on the root of the election problem, as long as the right details are properly exposed. When you finally see the root issues, you'll then see that any efforts to actually address those root issues will not be tolerated by your local political elite. It's important to have a correct diagnosis of the problem so you know where your time should be spent. Let's talk about local election fraud over the past decade in Utah. The entire Count My Vote fiasco, it was full of shenanigans, controlled opposition, supposedly accidental courtroom blunders. In 2016, Senate candidate Heather Gardner reported serious fraud against her, where she would have easily beat establishment crony Todd Weiler. Many of Defending Utah's members have run on their own time in their local parties, and to say the fraud is obvious is an understatement. If you're not a candidate for the establishment, you'll find yourself getting conveniently left behind where your political party accidentally drops the ball in getting you a delegate list, or maybe you get an old list with bad phone numbers, or maybe extra voters show up to caucus conveniently and your establishment opponent suddenly wins by 1 vote. These are all examples of things that we've witnessed over the years. Many politicians have used the emotional pull of election reform to pretend that they're doing something good without actually doing anything to make a difference. The deep state conspiracy actors at our local level would never get behind any true efforts to make elections work again. But because of the popularity of the issue, many of them give lip service. Unless you understand the root of the problem and can see what really would fix the issue, you will not recognize when somebody is wasting your time with empty actions and empty promises about solutions that won't do anything useful, even if they did what they were saying. Personally, I remember more than a full decade ago, back in the Obama days, I watched a video with a computer programmer testifying in court that the computer code he was hired to write could flip an election to any candidate, 51% to 49%. As an engineer myself, I understood the plain truth of his words as he testified that nobody would ever know unless you saw the computer source code yourself. No election reform in the world would change what the computer was doing behind the scenes. A machine like this could even potentially falsify physical audit trails, depending on how the process might be set up.
I'm a computer programmer.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes,
How do you know that to be the case?
because in October of 2000, I wrote a prototype for President Congressman Tom Feeney at the company I work for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
And when you say did just that, it would rig an election?
It would flip the vote 51-49 to whoever you wanted it to go to and whichever race you wanted to win.
The only way you'd ever find out is with actual human beings personally verifying the names of all voters on record, and then going door to door to ask each voter if the government's voting record matched what they really did. I commend many of you who got involved over the past couple of years to literally do exactly that. Activists across the country simply wanted to know if voting records were accurate. This is a very nonpartisan, not a left-right thing, not a libertarian thing, not a communist thing, not a Green Party thing. Just when people vote, are we accurately counting them? Thousands of volunteers walked door to door to verify the accuracy of government voting records. You'll see that in the report of the Utah Voter Verification Project, we have direct evidence of serious issues in our local elections. And you can bet that unless that is changed, you now know with certainty that your elections are not functioning properly. There's no doubt, vote all you want, but you're not being represented honestly. You have 2 choices, Utah. Number 1, you can find a way to fix the root of the election problem itself. You must gain full confidence that you can choose who your elected officials are if you're going to keep voting. Or number 2, you learn about committees of safety and community nullification, which is how the founding fathers used the right to peacefully assemble to solve this exact same problem that we're in. When every level of government is corrupt and dishonest, we are not left without a lawful tool to fix things. But again, that's a subject for a different video. So before I show you the interview with Elaine Moore of the Utah Voter Verification Project, let's just summarize exactly what we're looking at here. This voter report absolutely, without a doubt, identifies that there are serious issues in the election process. People voted who don't remember voting. Addresses that don't even exist are somehow recording votes. A variety of other problems here. These are issues that very simply, before you vote in November, should be resolved by the Lieutenant Governor's office. Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson should be so grateful that somebody did the work to find these issues so that she can fix them before the election happens. Instead of taking that approach, on her website, this is what she says: "Let us not heed baseless claims that undermine the public's faith in our election processes." Faith? Are we supposed to have faith in an election? Is this a religion? Or is this just numbers? The same number of people who voted, total, that actually voted, should pretty much be right on the same number of people that we've recorded have voted. Hey, thanks for joining us today. This is the Defending Utah radio channel, and I'm Enoch Moore, and we are speaking today with Elaine Moore, who is the Utah representative or lead for the Utah Voter Verification Project, a nonpartisan volunteer grassroots effort to canvass the Utah voter registration records. Hi, Elaine. Thanks for talking with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, so Elaine, you approached me and you're doing an amazing thing. I want to say I was really impressed. You created this report. And so we're going to talk today about this report that you made, which is something that every Utahn, every voter, every individual that kind of just cares about the right thing happening in the public process should be concerned about. And what you do with the Utah Voter Verification Project is you just audit the voter records to make sure things look good. And I should say this is like very basic auditing. This isn't, talking about Russian collusion and finding out which corporation hacked the voting machines. This is very simple to understand things such as if there are 5 voters on the public records, then those 5 people should probably exist somewhere. And you just kind of confirm the numbers, some very basic auditing. So you came out with a report, you did this. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Utah Voter Verification Project. Tell us why you started that and about this project, and what was your methodology for verifying that the people of Utah have legitimate elections?
So I started researching elections pretty heavily in probably December after the 2020 election. I was actually working on something else with elections, but I started focusing on the voter registration and election machines when all those questions started coming up. And when I would ask questions, I got so much pushback. And then when I started asking for a record of the voter rolls in February of 2021, in January, they couldn't produce them, or they were going to be really expensive. And they had no record of what actually of the people who actually voted in the 2020 November election. And that to me was very surprising, because I've always known that you can go and get a copy of the poll books. So I was really surprised. And as I started digging deeper into the process and realizing that we have a good portion of our voter rolls that are not accessible to the public because they're private or withheld, I realized pretty quickly that we're going to need to canvass. And one of the things that really solidified that for me was in June and July, when the Lieutenant Governor's election director, Justin Lee at the time, specifically put in an email that there is no backup of the voter rolls, that it's live and it's overwritten. They never keep a backup. So there's no way to even recreate or know who voted. And then I was getting the same answer from the counties. And I thought, well, who is actually registered to vote? And the only way we can know that if we can't get the records is to go door to door. And I honestly didn't think we would find half the things that we found. But we basically went to find, one, how many voters lived at that address, because we on average got anywhere from 35 to 40% or 47% of the actual people who voted or were registered to vote in that county during the 2020 election. And so we would ask, do these people live here? And then we would ask, did you vote? And then we would double check and see if a vote was processed. And if it was processed, was it processed the way they voted? For instance, in-person voting, just because you went in person and thought you did in-person voting, there are very specific standards that we discovered in our canvassing. That unless you follow those very specific steps, you're not recorded as an in-person vote. So when you say, I want more polling locations, we want more in-person voting, the data doesn't show it because they didn't record it the way you thought it was being recorded. And so we just started unearthing all these different issues and different problems that we really need to get fixed, and the transparency that we really need for our voter rolls.
Okay, Elaine. So I'm going to share right here the report that you made. And so you had this process, this very logical, rational process of just getting the public records and then confirming, just spot checking it, right? And
Mhm.
it's already fishy, as you said, in that you could only get a fraction of the records. I think, what did you say, 35% was
Yeah, and
available?
we actually had a statistician that I was able to get to volunteer, and I was so grateful. And she actually did this report, and in the report, she took the records I received, and then she took the official ballot summary, and she took how many people were eligible to vote in the 2020 election and compared those to the number of registered voters on the election summary, and then the number of ballots cast that I received and the number of ballots cast in those. And she came out with an average of 5% overvotes that were unexplainable in every single county. And some counties had more than others. But it was pretty clear from the beginning that there was something going on. Either there are so many records being deleted after the election, or there are a lot of people that shouldn't be on our rolls, or maybe there's ballots being put out there that aren't registered. I don't know. The numbers just didn't add up.
So I think you have a variety of issues as far as like lost votes. You have, right, mismatches. So when someone voted in person, but then when you talk to them, they actually voted differently than they said. So that could be fishy in that somebody thought they've mailed their vote in, but for some reason on the record, it says they voted in person. That's what a mismatch is, right?
Yes, and we even had some that went in person on November 3rd, but had a vote by mail cast a week or two prior. And those were some that, we don't know why, but that was the type of things we would find.
And here we have people voting that are ineligible to vote. You had extra ballots, right? And
Yes.
so all of these adding up to 13% had issues. So 13%, that'll swing an election easy,
Yeah,
right?
and we can't say 13% for the state or take it to a generalization because we're missing so much data. We can only show this is how many doors we knocked on. This is how many records we have to compare, because you have to remember 1 in 4 of the voters that we found that were living at the addresses, we didn't have records to compare. So we couldn't even look at those issues to see if they existed. But of the ones that we had a 13% error rate.
So you're saying it's worse than what you're able to document, but you're
Yes.
only reporting what you can actually prove, which is
Yes.
great, which should make this non-arguable. So,
We threw out a lot.
so here's one example. I love how you have these examples of, even though there's 200 lost votes, this shows how you came to that conclusion, right? It wasn't, this is very scientific, very provable,
Yeah, and
right?
full disclosure, whenever they've had the ballot tracking, and I don't remember when they put it in, but I have voted by mail, obviously, because that's what my county does. I didn't know there was an in-person route when I moved to Utah. My ballot wouldn't be processed. And even in 2020, my ballot was never processed. And it's very frustrating to me that every election, my ballot's never processed. So people are like, well, you're just weird. That's never happened. I actually had the county tell me that I was probably the only person in Utah that ever had that happen. I've never been contacted saying my signature didn't match. I've never been contacted by the county about any issues for my ballot. And so it was very telling that I started finding more and more of these lost votes. And the thing about the lost votes is they ended up being a pattern. So I only was able to really target lost votes and find those the last 6 weeks that we were canvassing. And I literally could map out a pattern and then go and find those lost votes.
Okay, so to emphasize again, there's a public record that a vote happened. Well, it could be one or the other, right? A public record that a vote happened. You go to the address of that voter and they say, I didn't vote, or vice versa, right?
Yeah, so a lost vote is someone that voted and there's no record. A
Okay, the
phantom
other,
vote is one of the issues, or we call it a ghost vote, means they do not vote. And many times at those addresses, they were never registered. They don't believe in voting or they don't
okay,
want to
got it,
vote.
got it.
And then we would find, but there are people voting from that address. They never knew who the people were that were voting
Okay,
at the address, that were casting those
so what
phantom,
I described was a phantom vote,
phantom vote.
and then a
Yeah.
lost vote was the other way around.
Yeah.
So when the government's official public records say somebody voted, and nobody actually, there's no real person anywhere that says, oh yeah, that was me at the address it's supposed to be, that's a problem. This is a
Yeah.
verifiable issue, something that needs to be fixed. And when someone says, let's read this one, Morgan and Sarah went together and put their ballots in the same drop box at the post office. So this is from your canvassing. Someone actually said
Yes. And
this
we changed the
to a
names,
live
but these are
person.
documented
Sure.
witness statements.
Okay. So these are testifiable witness statements.
Mhm.
So between Morgan and Sarah, who both remember putting their ballots, Sarah on the official record doesn't have a vote, while Morgan does. Right. So that
Yes.
vote has been lost. So
Yep.
those two situations should never happen.
Yeah.
Right. How can you have a free and fair election if people vote and their votes just disappear?
Well, and the counties push back a little by saying no one puts in a ballot that we don't contact them, that it's not taking, that it has an issue. But what I found is while you may think that's what's happening, when we went door to door, we found that's not actually what's happening. People are not being contacted. Something's going wrong with their ballot. Now, some of the counties are like, well, their ballot probably got shredded or lost. But if you put it in a drop box, those don't go through machines. The county goes to those drop boxes, puts them in their county possession, and it's in their possession from that point on. So how are these votes getting lost? How are the ballots getting lost? I
Right.
know mine, I put directly in the Dropbox or hand directly to a person, as I did in 2020, right with my husband's ballot. His ballot has always been processed and mine hasn't. I did keep calling for weeks asking if they found my ballot. They said in January they did. I don't know if they did, but the fact that we're able to find those consistently, the thing that bothers me the most about lost votes is it's not one area, it's not one precinct, it's consistent. And we got to the point where we could literally guess based on patterns of where we could find lost votes. And we could do that in any county, and we could go out and canvass and hoping we'd find an area without problems and without any issues. And sure enough, we would find the same type of issues at almost the same rate, regardless of where we canvassed.
Wow, that's fascinating. So give me an example of what you could predict and why you think that pattern was there.
So, for instance, the people that had lost votes, they often said they always vote. And in their voter history, there was a long history of no voting, or there might be sporadic history of voting. So that was one of the things we used to predict lost votes. The other thing was patterns. In certain counties, we were able to find every so many streets, there was a lost vote. Or we could almost put them on a map and kind of see a pattern. And then we'd say, oh, let's canvass these streets and see what we find. And then the more we would notice the patterns, finding issues or different things, then we would start looking at those. And that wasn't to try and get our numbers up. That's because we're trying to figure out what's going on. Is this a process issue? Is this an issue with the machines changing information? Is this an issue with our voter registration database? What's happening in our voter registration database that every point of the process is supposed to be recorded in that database, and what's happening to it?
Yeah, what you're doing sounds like a job the government should be doing. They should be auditing their own process, and they should know if their process works. And the fact that you brought some information to them, some anomalies, they should be grateful. They should say, oh, hey, thanks for doing that data. Now we don't have to hire somebody to do it. We'll take a look at it and see if, we'll fix these issues.
And
That's
we've been able to give some of the issue data to some of the county clerks. And when they go through it, they say, oh, there's no issues. And one of the ways they rectify the lost vote is they're lying. They don't know they're lying, but they're lying. They never voted. And then the other issue we
Oh,
have with
you
the
mean they're
mismatch.
claiming that the citizen was lying?
Yes, yes. Even though we have witness statements, whatever. One commissioner in a meeting actually said, it's just like when his wife loses the checkbook. She swears I have it and I can find it in her purse. And that's what's happening with these people saying they're voting. Not one of them that you went to that has a lost vote is telling the truth, even if they believe it.
Which
And I was
county?
like, wow.
Yeah, which county said, oh, the people are lying?
Yeah, Davis, Iron, Washington.
All of them.
Yeah, they didn't believe that people actually thought people were lying or just wrong. But Davis County, in all fairness, he looked at the data and did find that some of the things were wrong. But then, for instance, some of the people that didn't live at the addresses, he found that they would put in a mailing address before the election and then remove it after the election. Now, he didn't see a problem with that. I kind of do, because these people have said this person has never lived at this address and they've lived there for a year. Some of these people, they've lived there for 7 years to almost 10 years. And the people voting at those addresses, they don't know who they are. And so just because they say, well, they're using it as a primary address, I thought you had to live there at some point or know the people at those addresses. So they're saying that that's not an issue. And then some of the other stuff, they say they are able to see that they came in person to vote. And so they had to show a driver's license. And so when they said they voted by mail on this date, that was not accurate. And I don't know. When people are willing to fill out a witness statement and willing to talk to us, they're not there to lie. They're there to help us. They thanked us. If people were lying to us, it became really easy to tell when they were lying to us. Obviously, some people might be mistaken, but not at the rate, not with 6,000 people we talked to. Not every single person was misunderstanding or remembering what happened when they voted.
Did you think some people lied? Is that what you're saying?
I didn't include any of those. We always made notes. Yeah, some people did.
I see.
Most people, if they didn't want to talk to you, they just didn't answer your questions, and we're
Okay.
fine with that.
So it wasn't
not
about
everyone wanted to
deception.
answer.
It was more like, just go away, I'm busy.
Yeah,
It was more like that.
most of the time when we could tell people were lying, there was something sketchy going on. Like one address, there was like 6 or 7 people registered there. And when we went there, they're like, oh, we've never heard of those people. And then somebody else came to the door. They became very, very nervous, didn't want to talk, and basically said, yes, they all live here. And then that was it. Now, something was up with that, but I don't know. Some of the people would just lie and say they're not registered. And we could tell that they probably just didn't want to talk to us.
Okay. But so you threw those people out so that there was nothing weird in your data.
Yeah.
And you just stuck with the people that communicated and answered your questions. And you still have things like ineligible voters, phantom votes, people who voted in person, but the records say it was by mail, and lost votes. All of those were still happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are issues then to resolve here. So
yeah, because the ineligible voters, the state will tell you that it's just moms with missionaries. All our voter fraud in Utah is just missionary moms. It's not. First of all, missionaries do get a ballot as a primary residence, but college students also use their home as a primary residence. So if a college student did not live there, but they verified that this person did live there at one point, even if it wasn't in 2020 and they were away at college, we did not use those in our report unless the mother said, no, they have a permanent home and are married and wherever living, going to college at this place. Our ineligible voters and ineligible residents did not live there. And we confirmed with the resident and other ways that they did not live at that address. Maybe we found records that they sold their home or whatever, and we're able to confirm they did not live at that address during 2020.
Okay. All right. So then let's let's get a scope of the problem a little bit, just kind of a summary here with the number of voters. So this is 6 counties. You and the volunteers talked to 6,600 voters,
Mhm.
and 4,000 of them talked to you. Is that right?
Correct.
4,094? They actually
Uh-huh.
talked to you. Okay, and out of 4,094 people who talked to you, you had a total of 13% problems,
Well,
right?
so we have to subtract out the hidden records. So 1 in 4 of those were hidden records. So I think it says that we had somewhere in there, it tells you the number of 1,000 records of those were hidden. So it was like 3,000 something that we used for that 13%. So we took
Okay.
out, obviously, if they're hidden, we can't use that data. So that's literally only the records we had. And that was 13%. So it's about half of the people we talked to, we were able to use them to get our data and get our issues.
Okay, so it's a good sampling. So
Yes,
sometimes someone might say, "Oh, there are just 26 phantom votes. That's not very
right.
many, but this is just the sampling out of the total, and
Mhm.
this does add up when you add all of these problems together. That's a good
It,
chunk of
it can
problems,
change elections, especially local elections,
definitely.
because
And
we're not saying 13%, obviously for the state or for the county, but 13% issue rate for anything with elections is huge. You don't want to have that anywhere, even if it's just like we found vacant lots with registered voters. We found vacant buildings with registered voters. Those are the problematic addresses. And all of those things negate somebody's vote. And so, I mean, if you think of
definitely.
this recent election and how many of the elections were 1,000 or 2,000, or even into the double digits and triple digits difference, it can really add up. So, what would happen if we actually could look at all 6,000 of those records? Because we have the data. What would that percentage do? Would it go up or would it go down? I don't know.
So I would think when you bring this to an official, if I were an official, I would be like, who signed the voting, who signed the ballot for this dead person, right?
Right.
That's like serious fraud right there. Where did it come from? Follow the chain of custody. How are you know that's a real investigation that needs to be done for the public to even trust this process at all. The and then this hidden record thing. You defined hidden record here. A hidden
Mhm.
record is an individual voter not on our public Utah the voting record, right?
Mhm.
So tell us why. Why are there hidden records that we can't see if votes are recorded?
So in 2017, President Trump had an election integrity investigative committee that was going around the nation getting voter rolls. And in 20, Lieutenant Governor Cox sued the Trump administration with the League of Women Voters to say that he didn't want to give the voter records, but our law said that they were public records. Well, coincidentally, in 2018, the very next session, Becky Edwards and Karen Maine brought up a bill in the Senate to make all public records private. And they did, they passed it and they made that private checkbox, and then it was all private. And candidates couldn't even get that information at that time. So it removed a huge chunk of voters from the voter registration records that the candidates, the parties could see, and it didn't work. And in 2020, Anderberg brought up a bill, I believe it was SB 83, and it reclassified the broken legislation into 3: withheld, which withheld ended up being every person who was already marked private became withheld, and then private, and then public. And so what happened is you have about 40% of your registration data is public, and then the rest is private or withheld. And in some counties, it can be up to 60% that's public. And then it just depends on your county. I actually have counties that from April 2020, not a single new registered voter is public.
Wow. So the public record is actually very important for anybody for you to do an audit like this, but for anybody else to do an audit like this, for people to have any kind of confidence in the system. But what they've done here is they're hiding them. You had mentioned, remind me who said this. We talked before the call that they can see the votes. So it's almost like they have it on they made it private to everybody else, but it's open to the lieutenant governor and only them, and nobody else can see it. And you just have to take their word that those people voted
Yeah,
and what
so
they voted for.
withheld, even the voter records, withheld are supposed to be, any agency can get the withheld records. The health department has full access to our voter records.
Okay, wow.
And they can give those voter records to anybody. Any agency can give them to any group, the withhelds and the privates. Now, the reason we need the data is, how do you know the number of people who voted if they won't tell you? How do you
Right.
know who voted? How do you know how
Right.
many ballots are actually cast? When I started requesting the voter records, I asked, can I please just know how many people are registered so I know how many I'm missing? Nope, that's private and protected. Over and over, even in the last month, I've still been trying to get the total number of voters by county, by
Wow.
precinct, and they say that's a protected number. You
To
don't
say
get to
that,
know.
that's basically saying we didn't have an election.
Yes.
How is there any election if they can just make up any number they want and you just have to trust us?
Yeah, and then the secret ballot thing really came out. You can go to the Utah County Commission on YouTube, and I can't remember the exact date, but it was in the begin right after the Canvas report. They had a county commission meeting because Commissioner Bill Lee, as part of his board of canvassing duties, wanted to look at the cast vote records and wanted to just put this to rest. Just let us be transparent. Let's look at the cast vote records and the election data. Let's have an independent analysis of it and let the people see if there's any issues in Utah. And he was told, no, it's private information. And he talks about in that county commission meeting that we have a possible constitutional issue in Utah with our votes and our ballots, because in the system, it IDs them through every part of the system. And that if the county clerks can go in and know how somebody voted at any point in time. And Amelia Powers, the county commissioner, spoke about that in that county commission meeting as well. And you can go and listen to that. And I put a little clip up on my Rumble channel. It's Get Involved Utah on Rumble with the highlights from that county commission meeting. But you can go and also watch it live from the Utah County Commission YouTube.
Okay, great. I'll make sure that we link to that as well. So what you're describing, this really is, this is a violation right here. Elections shall be free. No power shall anytime interfere.
Yeah.
To prevent the free exercise of the right of suffrage. They're violating the Constitution. They're violating a principle of a representative republic where we can elect our officials if we can't believe that this system is even functioning properly.
It shouldn't be hard as citizens to have enough transparency where we can look at the official election data, we can look at the voter rolls, and we can compare it and say, okay,
right,
it looks good. Where now we're missing so much information, so much of it's hidden, some of it's protected, possibly not even secret. Then we have all these problems, and they're saying it's too complicated, that people can't know, you just have to trust us.
yeah.
But we weren't told we elect and trust. We were told we have to be, we the people are responsible. And if we're not watching and paying attention, that's when governments have problems, is when people get lazy or they become so consumed with fear and tyranny that they can't do anything. I'd rather stop it before we get to that point.
Boy, yeah, and I think it all comes down to that moment when you say, how many numbers? We want to audit the records, and they say, sorry, you can't, that's private. That is public information. That information belongs to the public. The public are the people who voted. It absolutely is public information. And so tell us, what are you went to the counties and you gave this report where you said, hey, there are some problems, and you had a very reasonable request. You said, hey, there's 200 lost votes, 13% issues. And you tell us what's your end goal? What were you asking the counties to do?
So one thing I wanted to do was have the counties look at the data. And I did have one county that was willing to look at it, and he did. And he determined that all my information was false. I disagree.
Well,
One,
that
he wasn't.
was that the guy who just said, oh, they all lied?
Yeah, well, that was said pretty much in every county, that you couldn't ever go off what the voter says.
Would like to know how
Um,
they know that. We don't trust the people. We'll just decide they're all liars.
it's kind of a cop out. I don't really focus
Totally.
on that too much in the meetings because they just want to argue about it. And I can't argue something that you can't prove. How do you prove something's not true? That's really difficult when it's made up information. So I focused on, look, you have this problem of lost votes. And then you have this problem
Right.
of the mismatch votes. So I want to know how you're recording the votes in your system. I want to know how you make sure that when somebody in good faith is trying to vote in person, that it's actually being recorded in person, because then you take that data and you use it for in-person polling places. If people in some counties, there's a good 50% that want to vote in person, you should have more in-person locations. Some counties don't have any in-person locations, but I bet you if they recorded it differently, they would see they need in-person locations. Secondly is transparency. This canvas definitely revealed that our voter registration system and the transparency with it is totally broken. And I was asking counties to, first of all, return to poll books. Not a single county can recreate who voted or even know who voted during the election. And how it's explained to me is the database is overwritten, it's never backed up, and that's done weekly, except during election, it can be every few hours up to hourly. And people can move on and off those voter rolls hourly. And so people could go in, have a vote cast, it goes through, and then they're automatically removed from the voter
Yeah,
registration database.
that's all cop outs too. Who doesn't
Yeah,
have backup of data with
we
their
have,
billion-dollar budget and
yeah.
multi-billion-dollar budget in the state, and you don't have a database backup? Whoever's in charge would be fired who never got that job.
And they're saying they can't do poll books because it's erased too
Yeah.
often. Well, I'm sorry, we have very strict guidelines for who can register to vote. And that's what I found in these discussions, as I was finding even more issues. So I was asking for the poll books, and then I was asking for static copies of the voter rolls to be made free, available to the public, that they actually take those copies and they have them on record, and you can go and pay a small fee, because I had to pay anywhere from $300 to $500 per county to get these rolls, and it was over $3,000 to get the rolls, and I still don't have all the counties because some counties refuse to give them to me. I have counties that have been fighting with their DAs to get the rolls, and the DA said nope, you can't have them. So it's been really frustrating. And then the third thing is unofficial election records. So they put out unofficial election summaries, and some counties already do this, and it's done very well. In 2020, I started noticing some real problems on the unofficial election summaries. And so I was really researching it. And as I started asking questions, all of a sudden I was being told that the state put out a thing to all the counties and saying that unofficial election summaries are no longer public record. And I'm trying to get some counties to bring those unofficial election summaries back. Some of the unofficial election summaries, you can actually see the number of registered voters moving by the thousands. That shouldn't happen during the elections. I think it reveals three things. So the poll books, the counties say there's no way for us to do poll books. It's too complicated. It can change hourly. And I'm like, how does that happen? People are registered 30 days before or on the day of the vote, right? No. We have inactive voters. So in 2016 and prior, on those election summaries, they listed active and inactive voters as the total voters. But then they started only doing active after 2016. So the inactive voters, all they have to do is update their voter registration and they can vote. So during that 30-day period, daily inactive voters are coming back on the rolls as active and getting a ballot. Now, right after the election, they might be bumped right back to inactive, And we saw that happen a lot in some of these issues that I found. They were actually people that were bumped onto active and then off. And that was with the Davis County Clerk looking at it. So we have a real problem with knowing who is actually voting.
Okay, so you've asked some very reasonable things from our county governments in this matter. And so you would hope reasonably they'd want to respond, but they actually haven't responded with, yeah, we want to work with you on resolving this.
The biggest pushback I've had is that the word hidden and issue are insulting to the county clerks, and that it is a violation of the First Amendment. And this was something that was brought up, and it was really the third clerk that he was very aggressive about it being a First Amendment violation. In Iron County, John Whitaker, he brought it up several times, and he actually said that my report was just like the Second Amendment, that when someone pulls the trigger, they no longer can exercise the Second Amendment because they're in violation. So my report with the words hidden and issue, because they're threatening, is a First Amendment violation, and I am no longer have the right to exercise my First Amendment with this report. And that was a common theme, I think, put down through the state, and something that was decided.
So they're telling you that you're violating the First Amendment by putting out information and saying something which doesn't even make any logical sense, right? So constitutionally speaking, First Amendment, that's part of the Bill of Rights. That's a restriction on government. That's not even something you can violate. The government violates it when they tell you you can't talk. The Constitution is the law that restricts the government. So what they're saying doesn't even make sense. And then, so if they've got a problem with something you're doing, it looks like they're really grasping at straws there. And so this would be good. You know, this report can get out to the people, and they can see for themselves. There was even to show you the intimidation that was coming out against you, right? This was,
yeah, it's been many months of intimidation, especially from the lieutenant governor's office.
Yeah,
and
let's
then
pull that
one
up.
of the things, they passed the buck. A lot of the counties say they cannot implement any changes or even look at the things I want, because the state controls the elections. So that's another thing that this Canvas report exposes, that our elections are not decentralized in Utah. We have a state centralized election system.
That can be controlled.
Yeah, that's definitely being controlled from the top. Even when you do records requests, you'll start seeing every county clerk respond word for word exactly the same. They're not doing that on their own. They've been instructed.
So the Salt Lake Tribune talked about what you have been doing. They called you a Utah group. This article was about you guys.
Yes.
Oh, look, they did call you by name. Who's behind the Utah Voter Verification Project, right? But at the bottom, they ask, can they do this? Like, are you allowed to do this? And here you have Lieutenant Governor Henderson says she's called the FBI. She's threatening you with the FBI for what? For doing what everybody does every election year, and just knocking on doors, asking questions, and people willingly respond. This is a very normal thing. And so they're clearly very triggered by this if they're publishing in the Salt Lake Tribune that, oh yeah, we've talked to the FBI about those folks.
Yeah, what's even funnier, most of the article at the very beginning especially is so false. I didn't even know what Stop the Steal was. I'd never even heard of it. They still push that like we're some big conspiracy group, and it's not. They push a whole Melissa thing. I did not even know. I didn't know Mike Lindell. I'd never done anything with him at this point. And they're trying to connect me to all this stuff. And I had, they
Links.
even at one point mentioned that I had the FBI or the 3%ers in my as volunteers, and I didn't know who they were. And when I looked it up, that was the FBI fake militia from Michigan that infiltrated and did that Whitmer thing. And I thought, well, maybe I have one that's infiltrated my Canvas, but I don't know who these 3%ers are. I just think it's kind of weird how they tried so hard to make me sound dangerous for doing something so benign.
Right, absolutely. And it seems nationally there's kind of a similar effort. You gave me this link to the US Department of Justice report, and they talked about audits briefly, but at the bottom of the page, they talk, so this is mostly about electronic data, but at the bottom, there's a little reference to physical canvassing. And basically what they're saying is, don't make people feel bad. You know, like if you hurt somebody's feelings because you knocked on their door to say, would you like to participate in a voter integrity project? And, you know, and you can ask a polite question, but don't make them feel bad, right? When these efforts are directed or perceived to be directed at minority voters, they can feel intimidated. And so it's definitely very out there.
Well, and I'm sure some areas of the country are probably harder to canvass than Utah, but I would say in Utah, 99% of them thanked us. They were happy we're there. They were happy and willing to participate. They were really glad that someone was out there canvassing. Someone was out there double checking and making sure. And we had hundreds of volunteers throughout the state that volunteered to help us knock on doors. And so they would each volunteer. The average volunteer was about 3 to 4 hours. And then we'd get new volunteers all the time. And it worked out really well. And they didn't have bad experiences. And, you know, I knocked on thousands of doors, and I think I had two that they weren't upset that I was there, but they wanted to know who I voted for. I never asked anybody who they voted for. We didn't care. But he wouldn't talk to me unless I told him who I voted for. And I'm like, well, that's not why we're here. And I did tell him because it doesn't really matter. But people weren't upset or felt threatened. They were happy that someone was overlooking our government because they understand that the citizens have to hold the government accountable. That's the whole point of America. America is about the people. I actually had a county clerk say that my canvas report is good and they liked that I was willing to do it, but I shouldn't be asking people and checking to see if their ballots are processed. I could look and see maybe if the voters were there or not, and that might be helpful to them, but we don't need to be looking about ballots processed. And I was really confused. And he said, well, you have to understand there's 4 pillars of the government. One is the people. And if the people aren't involved, the government works just fine by itself, but it works better with the people. Now, this stuck out to me because I actually had some representatives that I was trying to talk to about legislation that said the exact same thing to me, that the people don't need to be involved in the legislative process. And this is actually something that some of our elected leaders believe, but the people on the ground don't believe that. They know that the people
These
are
are,
involved and they know it's the people.
and nothing could be further from the truth. The truth is, if the people aren't involved, there is no government, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly it just becomes a good old boys club that doing whatever they want. And that's how tyranny grows. And, you know, the Benjamin Franklin said after the Constitutional Convention, if you want your republic, you know, it's up to you to keep it, you know?
Yeah.
And
And it's the
so
people holding those pillars up.
absolutely. So absolutely the people need to be involved. This elitist attitude of we don't need the people's involvement, that is so telling for the mindset that is so inappropriate, that absolutely the people should not tolerate. We should not humor it. Those are not people that should be in the positions they're in, because we are their bosses and they are the employees. We put them there, they work for us.
Yeah, they're replacing the people with NGOs, basically, non-government organizations. You know, they want to replace the people with Utah County Association of Clerks. They want to replace us with cities and towns. They want to replace us with TCL,
Right.
with the Brennan Center in elections, whoever, in whatever type of government. But the people have to be firm and stand strong and say, no, this is our government. And we want to hold you accountable. And that's all I want. All I want to do is figure out if there's a problem. And I did find some issues. And then how do we go about reconciling those issues? Some of the issues may not need to be as addressed and might not be as urgent as others, but transparency and being able to actually know how many people are registered to vote in our elections is huge. How do you know if you're having too many people vote if nobody knows those numbers?
Absolutely. So you are doing a favor for everyone, and we're absolutely grateful for the effort you and your team of volunteers has put in. I think we wanted to cover one more thing that we briefly touched on, but let's quickly talk about that, where they're claiming they've been intimidating you. You said that there were several meetings where they said you're violating the First Amendment, and when the most specifics they could come up with is they didn't like your use of the word hidden,
Mhm.
and they didn't like your use of the word issue, as
Yeah,
if you're not allowed to use the English language. That doesn't even make any sense, right? This is your
yeah,
paper, you're communicating, and if they have a question about what you mean, right there, you defined it. Here's what I mean, a hidden record. These are voters that are not on the public. So to me, they're hidden from my view. Sounds very reasonable. And ultimately, it's up to you what words you use and how you communicate. You're trying to communicate an idea or a result so that people understand. And I think you've done a great job communicating. And it's certainly not illegal to pick various words of the English language that you feel properly communicates the information in your report.
yeah, because they've been coming after canvases across the country. And so Colorado Canvas Group was sued by the League of Women Voters for violating people's rights. And it's frivolous and it's unfounded. And other groups have had pressure put on them about canvassing. And some of the issues that have come up is that the Biden Department of Justice was talking about earlier this year. And if I could find those articles, I will gladly give those to you. But they were basically saying that asking about past elections is not a First Amendment right. But it doesn't do that. The First Amendment doesn't have an expiration date or whatever they call that legally when a criminal case cannot be charged. There's no expiration for freedom of speech. And
And
so,
any two persons can voluntarily choose to have a conversation about whatever they want.
yeah,
It's so arbitrary for them to say that. You know, these lawsuits remind me of how the ACLU sues public schools. They have a strategy of threatening to sue, but not actually going through with it. A lot of times when they threaten to sue because a teacher talked about religion one day in class, they
right.
threaten a lot, and they don't have to actually sue. They just have to have an administrator tell the teacher, hey, the ACLU is threatening to sue us,
Yeah.
and then that squashes it right there, right? So it's important that as we the people, we're not intimidated by those kinds of things, and we have to understand our rights. Freedom of speech means exactly what it says. Freedom of speech. You're not using your speech to hurt somebody and you can hurt people's feelings. That's not even, a problem, but, and so it's ridiculous for them to use those terms for sure.
Yeah, the intimidation tactic right now. I don't think people realize it's nationwide. And you can say, "Oh, this is horrible that it's happening in Utah," but it's happening everywhere. And I definitely have had intimidation tactics for many, many months, almost a year now, and it's not fun for
Mhm.
sure. But we cannot let it stop us. And that's one reason why I wanted to bring attention to the First Amendment issue, because I don't want to wait until they can put information out and then people don't have anything to go and compare it to. So hopefully people will go and research this, find out if they agree that this report is a good thing and is something that should be looked at. And then they can make their own decision without having to research it after the fact.
Awesome. Great. So Elaine, then, other than that, any other last things? What do you want the people to do right now? How can anyone help you? And how do you think something good can happen next?
So I actually started a nonprofit to raise money for records and different things, because you have to have that to raise money in Utah for a permit. And so I have Get Involved Utah, and right now we're trying to get the money. It's about $2,100 to get the static copies of the voter rolls that was passed in the 2022 session. And so according to the state, we cannot request those at a county level. We can only request those at a state level because they own the voter registration database. And they're very expensive. And then the second thing we're doing is we're trying to get information out to people to work with their county commissioners to get transparency. We need them to expose the centralization of our elections. People need to understand that when the lieutenant governor says our counties administer the elections, she's not wrong. That's all they do. They have zero executive power. They don't make any decisions on any of the processes for the election. That all comes from the state. And so when we have something that's decentralized, and even Ricky Hatch, I have a bunch of different quotes from different organizations and agencies in the government from 2016 on, saying the only thing that keeps our elections secure is decentralization. And we have to keep that decentralized at a state level, not just a federal level.
So you're saying we need a lot more reform.
Yes,
than
we are
just
going to
little
have
things.
legislation coming up. We've got to change. So decentralization is, we've got to change the law that changed this to a statewide vote by mail. Everyone thinks we've always been a statewide vote by mail because we've had it since 2010, but that was a pilot program. Until 2020, you had to contact the county and say, yes, I want to be a no excuse vote by mail. And they would send you the ballot. After 2020, they changed the law from may have a vote by mail election in a county to shall. So the counties no longer could choose. Everyone automatically became vote by mail for the first time in 2020. That's one reason why it upsets me when people are like, why are you looking at vote by mail in Utah? This has been done. No, 2020 was the very first time we had that. And then 2020 was the very first election that we had 3 categories of voter registration. Withheld, private, and public. So we need to be looking at this right now because it clearly isn't working. And the more we can expose this and get transparency, the better, because all we want to know that our elections are perfect and wonderful. We know there's always problems, but we have to have the transparency so that as the people, we can access those records and feel comfortable with what's going on.
Great. Thank you, Elaine. It's been great to talk with you today.
Thank you.
Mr. Curtis, would you please state your full name for the record?
My name is Clinton Eugene Curtis,
And where do you reside?
Tallahassee, Florida.
And what is your profession?
I'm a computer programmer.
Would you please speak into the microphone so the audience can hear your testimony?
I'm a computer programmer.
Mr. Curtis, are there programs that can be used to secretly fix elections?
Yes,
How do you know that to be the case?
because in October of 2000, I wrote a prototype for President Congressman Tom Feeney at the company I work for in Oviedo, Florida, that did just that.
And when you say did just that, it would rig an election?
It would flip the vote 51-49 to whoever you wanted it to go to and whichever race you wanted to win.
And would that program that you designed be something that elections officials that might be on county boards of elections could detect?
They'd never see it.
Mr. Would you answer that question once again?
They would never see it.
So how would such a program, a secret program that fixes the election, how could it be detected?
You would have to view it either in the source code or you'd have to have a receipt and then count the hard paper against the actual vote total. Other than that, you won't see it.
All right, Mr. Curtis, if you had been asked, you or others with your professional expertise had been asked to design a protected program that would protect the Ohio elections from against such software to fix the election, could you have done so?
If we've been asked to make a program that can fix the election, sure, anybody can do it.
No, could you have designed a program or a procedure or a protocol that would have protected Ohio against this kind of rigging?
No, you have to look at the source code. You have to get probably programmers from both or all parties to look at the source code and determine if there's anything in there that shouldn't be there. I mean, it's a simple program. You're adding 1 to a person's total. It's 100 lines of code tops.
All right. Are you aware of whether there was any protective action in Ohio against this kind of vote rigging through software?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know.
you were not asked to assist in the development of any protective system, is that correct?
No, I was not.
In Europe, have you reviewed at all the election results in Ohio?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Given the availability of such vote rigging software and the testimony that has been given under oath of substantial statistical anomalies and gross differences between exit polling data and the actual tabulated results, do you have an opinion whether or not the Ohio election, presidential election, was hacked?
Yes, I would say it was. I mean, if you have exit polling data that is significantly off from the vote, then it's probably hacked.
And your testimony is under oath,
Yes, sir.
and the testimony you've given is true.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.